started.
Sure.
And you ask on tape, could you state your name
I'm David Ward.
and spell it
W-A-R-D.
Okay, just for some future guy who digs it up and says, what did he say? I'm not quite sure. Okay.
Sure.
Okay, and what's your proper title now is interim, or is it post-interim?
It's interim chancellor until June 1st
Okay.
of 2009.
Very good. Now, I'd like you to think back about your coming to UW Green Bay, and maybe we should rehearse that a little bit.
Sure.
How did you first come to get involved with the university? What year?
Well, if you really want to go back, I actually attended my first 2 years of college at the forerunner to this campus. It was a 2-year campus in the city of Green Bay. I was from Green Bay. And so for the first 2 years I went to the 2-year campus, which was on the east side of Green Bay. And in the second year that I attended, it moved into a new building, which was the Deckner building. And the Deckner building was one of the early buildings used by UWGB in 1968 and 69 to house faculty and hold classes.
Okay, well, where was that prior building?
Prior building was right next to what was called City Stadium, and it was a Quonset hut. This would be approximately 500 yards north of East High School on Baird Street.
All right, there's an FFA building now to the north of the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the location, or is it between the school and the stadium?
It's right on Baird. It was right on Baird Street.
Okay.
We went down Baird Street and turned right in, and it was on the south, what you would call the south bank of the East River.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Sure. Then I was off to Madison for undergraduate and graduate degrees. In 1968, I started looking for a teaching job, and my field was finance. I knew there was a new university to open up in my old hometown, so I contacted Rowland Posey, who was the Dean of Professional Studies. I did an interview in, I think it was either late fall or early winter of 68, 69. After that, I mean, they wanted to hire me, but we couldn't agree on how much on the salary, and eventually we did.
Were you a good negotiator?
I don't know, but I guess maybe.
Okay, now did you have your PhD, or were you at a master's level? Or?
I was master's level, plus I passed my prelims, so I was, as they call it, ABD, all but dissertation. And I came here needing to complete my degree, and I started teaching in the fall of 1969, which I mark, and I think most people mark, as the official opening of UW Green Bay. So started teaching there, and then taught here for 7 years before I left for UW Oshkosh.
Now, did you grow up in Green Bay?
I grew up in Green Bay on the west side.
Okay, and you went to high school?
High school was Green Bay West High School, right.
Okay, so you have a real sense of the community that a lot of people don't.
I was one of the few natives. There were some others. Jack Frisch was here. He was a Green Bay guy. There were a few others, but I actually was born and raised here.
Okay. Now, there are two ways I have started to look at this as writing this article, and one is to look at it from the perspective of the University of Wisconsin and what they wanted to accomplish, what they expected, and the other was what the community wanted and expected. And of course, they're going to be different just because they're different entities. In terms of the community, the record that I found, written record, is that somewhere in 1958, after Gaylord Nelson became governor, he mentioned this possibility of a university. Mm-hmm. Is that the earliest record? You know that it was mentioned as a Northeastern Wisconsin University? He didn't mention specifically Green Bay.
I don't know of anything before that.
Okay.
I think at the time that he was talking about it in the 50s, going to college was unusual in this region. We didn't have a very high go-to-college rate. And I think aggregately in the country, maybe 10 to 15% of high school graduates went on to college. So we hadn't seen the great burst in enrollments that followed with, I sort of mark, the thing that really triggered it all was the Russians launching a satellite called Sputnik. And suddenly we needed engineers. And so tons of people went toward the university, somewhat as I did, thinking they were going to be engineers, got there, found out that wasn't for them, and then they branched out into other areas. And we went through the record enrollment period of the 60s. Part of that was due to Sputnik, part of it was due to a vastly growing need for teachers. And so teacher education drove a lot of the campuses, particularly those that were in what was then called the Wisconsin State University system.
Right. Well, I'm glad you put it on this sort of a social context, because this is how I'm trying to see where it fit for the University of Wisconsin and for the state of Wisconsin. What did they see as the needs to create this? In '65, of course, there were documents signed, and the whole idea of a university with an environmental mission, or man in the environment mission, came about. So how did that arise? Was it related to competition with the Russians, technology, population?
Well, I think the sort of the secret of all of this that I've never seen written is that it really arose out of competition between two university systems. The University of Wisconsin had campuses at Madison and Milwaukee. The state university system had 9 campuses spread around the state. Almost, well, all of them were former teachers' colleges. From Superior in the north to Whitewater in the southeast, from Platteville in the southwest to Oshkosh in the northeast. And there was a great competition for budget in the legislature. And I believe, if you went back and looked, you might find written the notion that the University of Wisconsin system felt it was getting outflanked, and so its response was to establish 2 new campuses in the largest population areas, which would have been Green Bay and then Kenosha-Racine. I'm not sure anybody started out to create an environmental campus in Green Bay. I think that came with the Chancellor. I think the Chancellor, Ed Widener, shaped a lot of that. I think the local expectation wasn't at all program specific. It was, we want a 4-year university here. And I think that they saw it as meeting regional needs, particularly in business. This was a big manufacturing area, still is. Lots of other businesses here. Need for teachers, need for professionals of various kinds. So I think when it first started, the community saw it as a university kind of in a generic way. I think the UW-Madison people saw it as putting their stake in the ground in 2 important areas. Now, all of that pretty much got thrown into a kettle when the merger occurred in 1971. When they opened this campus in '69, the idea that we would merge all of the universities into one system was about as far away as California. That nobody thought could be done, either practically or politically. But in 1971, it was done.
And I was sort of reading between the lines, but that's what I saw as sort of like, it probably was competition for money that was not expected when it was founded, and all of a sudden, oh, we got no money. How do we react?
Well, I think that the legislature, for one, the tipping point was probably the 69, 71 biennial budget, and the prospects of 71, 73, that they were getting torn by these two systems and competing demands. The prospects at the time for the state university system, they were talking about PhD campuses. So had that merger not occurred, I'm pretty sure you would see PhD programs at places like Eau Claire and Oshkosh. So for a whole variety of reasons, I think it was Governor Lucy that struck on the original idea that we needed to bring these together. And that was it, and it was done by one vote in the Assembly, passed by one vote in the Assembly, and a few votes in the Senate.
Was there a single person who cast that vote, or it just came out?
I think if you went back, you would find that there is, and I'm trying to remember who that was, but there were some fence sitters that were important. And eventually somebody got tipped off the fence, and it passed 51-40, whatever it was, 48 or something like that, or 50-49. It was a one-vote margin, and surprised everybody, I think. I don't think anybody thought that could be pulled off. To me, it was the political feat of the last half of the century in Wisconsin, and Pat Lucy was the guy that managed to do it.
As a victory for what he wanted?
Yeah, I think he wanted that. I don't know what his vision was exactly. You know, he's still around. I see him in Door County. I don't know if he'd have any recollections of this or not.
Thank you for the tip.
Yeah.
I thought he passed on. Okay.
No, I saw him about a year and a half ago up in Door County, and I know he's been up there since.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. The sort of conflict or competition for resources between the two, I've got things from the archives that speak of that.
Mm-hmm.
But what's kind of surprising is that they didn't expect it. That when the UW decided to proceed on this, they didn't foresee that, or did they just foresee themselves?
Foresee the merger, you mean? Or?
No, foresee themselves as powerful enough to overcome the competition, which was evident because it's talked about in this creation of this Council on Higher Education. And
yeah. Yes, the CCHE was the I guess you could call them the refereeing body, the arbiter, which tried to walk a line between these two systems of higher education, between the Madison-based UW system and the Wisconsin State University system. So that was a very political process, and we needed to get permission to practically move off campus from CCHE. They controlled a whole bunch of things. So I suppose the one thing that came out of the merger, was the CCHE was abandoned, but in place of it we have a central office or system office, and that's again, it's a piece of the history of higher education that I'm not sure lots of people know about.
Yeah, were there geographic sort of pockets of power for the state college system versus the university? And obviously, Dane County, the university.
Yeah, I think there were before the establishment of UW Green Bay, legislators in the Fox Valley and practically all the legislators west of Green Bay and probably north of Madison had something at stake in the state college system. The state colleges had some two-year campuses, so their influence politically was spread wide geographically. Their problem wasn't spread very deeply from a population base. The UW was in the two main population points, Madison and Milwaukee. And so Whitewater was able to pull some southeastern Wisconsin politicians along. So they it was evident that they had figured out how to politically get their act together.
Yeah, but the UW or the state?
The state colleges. And the UW, on the other hand, relied on so many people that were its alums, who are, many of whom, not a huge percentage, but many of whom were in the legislature, or who were the governor, or whatever. So that was key. Going back to the merger, one of the stories I remember about this was the key role that Lee Dreyfus played in the merger. There was some resistance to the merger on both sides. The UW was, Madison people were most opposed. But there was some resistance on the part of the state university people who felt that they were winning the battle. Why go dance with the 800-pound gorilla now? And my recollection is that Lee Dreyfus had something to do. He was the president at Point at the time, and that he convinced some of the legislators in the area to vote for it. So that's another piece. Lee is gone now, of course.
Yeah. His aide, though, Bill Krause, is around.
Yeah, Bill might know.
Yeah.
Bill might know, sure. The other guy that, last name is Williams, blanking on his first name, who lives in Stevens Point, who ran his, the whole, what would you call it, the political campaign, created the school bus, and they went around the state in the school bus, and they had a band. And he's still in Stevens Point. He would remember this too.
Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for the tips. I can check into those.
Sure.
Just sort of for your information, I can forward you. There are oral history transcripts from Harrington in the 80s, and he talks about this legislative balance in the trapezoid. He talks about they had to get the campuses in this area where the legislators were in order to compete. So you'll be interested to see that, I think.
Yes, yes.
Okay, let's talk about the context of the environmental mission. Ed Widener was a political scientist, and he'd worked in international development, working in Vietnam and other parts of Asia. And there's no hint in his writings, and I've looked at his book on universities, of where did this environmental interest come from? Do you have any suggestions or hints?
Well, I think Ed, just from my relationship with him and my observation of him, was a good strategist, and I believe he thought he needed to distinguish a new university. And that the first pillar upon which that was done was interdisciplinary study. So that, I think long before this became fashionable, he kind of saw a curricular model in which we would begin to merge disciplines and teach from an interdisciplinary standpoint. The early manifestations of that were maybe pretty crude, like a team-taught class. You'd bring a sociologist and a biologist together, and they would have a perspective. So I think that was the first pillar. I think the second pillar, the environmental piece of it, represented a good application point, because as you looked at the environment, and there were some early signs in the 60s, and Ed was political. He studied these things. But he could see some of the early manifestations. The Vietnam War had some environmental manifestations, particularly in Agent Orange and some of the other things that happened in the war. He was pretty keenly attuned to this. And also it was a piece of ground that I'm not sure, well, I pretty much know there were very few people exploring. that really were committed to it. I mean, we had some old departments within traditional universities in forestry or in conservation. You know, the early forerunner of environmental movement, I think, is the conservation movement. So I really think that that emerged as the natural focus for this interdisciplinary approach, because it brought together all kinds of factors, science and politics and economics, together on a single theme, which was the environment.
Now here's just an idea that came in rereading again some other transcripts, which I hadn't had this knowledge. Harrington mentions that UW-Madison was controlled by the science department, and that the history and the social sciences were very upset about this, but that the dean of the graduate studies and the dean and all these other people, LVM and Fred and whatever, so if they were in charge and Harrington was sort of an appointee, he was sort of got it through inheritance or whatever, could it have been their influence saying, this is the big problem, it's a science problem?
You know, my take of it was there was very little Madison interaction on the actual development of the curriculum. Where Madison was important was the governance structure of the campus. If you look at our governance structure back then, it's different today because of some statutory changes, but if you look back to the governance model that first came out, it was a UW-Madison model all the way. You could go on to one of the old WSU campuses today, you wouldn't find a university committee. The university committee was a primary block and structure in the governance thinking of UW-Madison that went over to UW-Milwaukee and then Parkside and Green Bay. A relatively small group of very influential professors, as opposed to the kind of more dispersed faculty senate model. In the early days of UW Green Bay, we're a little bit off the topic, but I think this is worth noting. In the early days of UW Green Bay, the governance was done by committee of the whole meetings. The entire faculty got together about 4 times a year to consider a wide range of governance issues. So I think that was, and that was true at Madison, big meetings of the faculty. Those are not nearly as observable on the state university campuses. But I don't know that I ever detected any mission linkage with Madison. Now, I think Madison was interested that Green Bay and Parkside not get into their turf, and that may have been another reason why Ed went the direction he went. But I think if you look at Ed's convocation speeches from 1969, when, that very first year, and you look at them for 6 or 7 years, what you find is that early on we had this big push in the environmental area. As the economy soured in 1973, and we went through a very severe recession, much like what we're going through now, and it lasted, it was one of the longest post-war recessions, maybe 16 months. The environmental bubble lost a lot of its gas, primarily because people began looking at economics. And about 1973, or 72 or 73, if you look at that convocation speech, I think you will find that there's a sort of paradigm shift, not entirely, because Ed was still committed to the environment. But you'll see in that, he'll talk about, this is the mission, man and the environment is the mission of UW Green Bay. But environment is this larger concept that not only includes the physical environment, but the social environment. And so we ought to be concerned about man and the social environment. We are, and then the key, I think the key device that moves that is we are problem solvers from an interdisciplinary standpoint. So if you studied those early convocation speeches, and they are long speeches, I think you'd find that shift somewhere in when the economy got rough, 73, 74, 75. When we were in and out of recessions in the first 12 years in the university, we had 4 recessions. So the environmental theme certainly continues, but I think Ed was interested also in growing the university and in figuring out how the university had adapted to what was going on in the community and the surrounding area. So that kind of goes on then for a while. You'll also see early on, you may have read some of this, that after the merger, Ed tried in a number of ways to get Green Bay into a special slot. We basically, after merger, we had Division I or Research I institutions, even though Milwaukee really wasn't doing that much research. But they were kind of a land grant de facto. And urban universities were becoming somewhat recognized as kind of a different type of Research I university. So you had those two, and then you had everybody else. And Ed felt from a budgetary standpoint and a funding standpoint, he had to get Green Bay into an intermediate tier. So at one point, he teamed up with, I don't know if it was Bob Swanson or who was heading UW Stout. And they went to the board on the basis that these 2 campuses were special mission campuses. Now that was indeed strange bedfellows, because we had a UW campus and a Wisconsin State University campus, a campus that was an environmental campus, a campus that basically trained, to begin with, vocational education teachers, and was very hands-on industrial. But it was unique, still is today, I think. And so when you look at that attempt, it was an attempt to create that second tier that said, okay, you got your research ones, and then you have your special mission campuses. And we've got and part of our special mission is the environment, interdisciplinary problem solving.
And as I read this is about 1974, where you had some hearings of the regents here, and I thought it was like already done back in '69, but then I'm seeing this stuff like, oh, it's '74 and they're calling it a special mission. Well, that was a lot later than I thought. It was, because I don't think we started out with that terminology. I think that terminology emerged during that recessionary period, 73, 74, 75. And Ed saw a need to, again, how could he position UW Green Bay to be, so it didn't get swept up. There were, the implications, particularly in teaching load, were very significant. The teaching load in the state university system, and that changed after a while, but it was 4 courses each semester, 12 credits. The teaching load at Green Bay was 9 credits, so it was 18 credits total. So there were implications on teaching load, particularly at Green Bay, where I don't think anybody would argue that the interdisciplinary approach took more time and more resource to deliver. So that's where that special mission came from. I can remember him doing that with, again, it was either Bob Swanson or with somebody, whoever was the president at Stout at the time. There's another aspect, and I don't know if you know, you have to know Ray Vlasin.
Yes.
Who does economic development. It seems like he would be a partner of yours in various projects or something.
That's years ago.
But he was like in a top tier aide to the Chancellor.
Mm-hmm.
And he was set to give testimony before a congressional committee on environmental education in '73 or so. And testimony was prepared, whatever, and then it was canceled for a congressman named Bradamus from Indiana.
I remember Bradamus, yeah.
And
Bradamus, maybe.
I don't know how to pronounce
Yeah,
it, but
I think.
I've seen it in print. And I was just wondering, was that maybe reaction to recession, or was there some other politics going on that